Many of us were shocked recently to see 40,000 baseball fans in the stands in Arlington, Texas, as the Rangers hosted the Toronto Blue Jays. Go Jays, go. Lots of people were mocking the idea of fans in the stands. But you looked at the numbers, Brian Lilley, who joins us once again from Toronto, and you say people shouldn't be so quick to judge or even laugh, right?
No, they shouldn't, Hal. And, this is a shocking thing about COVID-19. In Canada, every conservative premier is the worst leader in the world and has the worst numbers in the world, except for evil Republicans in the United States who are even worse. And we should never learn from anybody else except do a better job than what we're doing now. That's what I keep hearing when I talk about Ontario COVID numbers or Alberta or anybody anywhere else. Oh, we should be doing better like so and so. Okay, let's look at Texas then, because right now Texas has a rate of COVID cases per 100,000 over the last week that's at about half of what Ontario's is. Ontario's at about 121, 122. Texas is at 67. Alberta's a bit below Ontario, I think at about 105, 107 in that area. But Texas is still below Alberta. In fact, they're below every major province, I think, except Manitoba at the moment. And they opened up a month ago. A month ago, it was Governor Greg Abbott just said, you know what? Every job's essential. Every business is essential. It's your choice whether you want to open or not. Major League Baseball came along. They were going to do like the New York Yankees did. I don't know if you watched any of the Jays-Yankees series. They had about 20% capacity, and you had to have a vaccination or a negative COVID test to get in. Canada's ambassador to the United Nations, Bob Ray, was there, tweeted about it. Bob's, well into his 70s. He's got his COVID vaccine. Good for him. He went to the game. In Texas, they just said it is your personal calculated risk. So if you choose to buy a regular ticket, you're going to be sitting next to somebody you don't know and don't live with. Or you could choose to go sit in the socially distant section. But they gave you choices. That's not something that we really have here in Canada.
You know what's really interesting about Texas as well? One of the hardest hit regions, Texas, New York State, Florida, when the COVID pandemic first hit. Brian, the federal Conservatives are calling for an inquiry into Ottawa's handling of the pandemic, and the Trudeau Liberals have said, yes, that's the right thing. What's going on here?
Health Minister Patty Hajdu was asked about it. So Aaron O'Toole proposed this on which day? On Tuesday morning. He proposed it, and Patty Hajdu was asked about it later in the day, and she said yes, when the time's right. So not right now, but when the time is right. That is the right answer. Look, I'm not a fan of public inquiries. I think that they're bloated. I think that they cost too much money. I always point to the inquiry into Brian Mulroney and his dealings with Karl-Heinz Schreiber, and that cost us $16 million to find out that Brian Mulroney had bad judgment when it came to Karl-Heinz Schreiber. That's all we found out that we didn't know already. I would have told you that for $5. Take me out for a pint. I would have told you that. That's it. But these public inquiries can take on a life of their own. So I normally don't back them. In this case, I do. The Liberals have made sure that, just like they did with the WE scandal and SNC-Lavalin, they're trying to stymie House of Commons committees from doing their job. We are finding out an awful lot, much of it not looking good for the government. In fairness to them, no government would look good because it was a novel coronavirus. Nobody knew what they were doing. The whole world was melting in those early days. But I think a public inquiry is the right thing. Good on Aaron O'Toole for calling for it. Good on the Liberals for saying yes.
Brian, it appears as though Prime Minister Justin Trudeau and various ministers are pushing the provinces to vaccinate faster and use more doses in the freezers. Tell me more about that.
Yeah, this is part of the ongoing back and forth. Do you remember back in January, Justin Trudeau stood at the podium and said how he was frustrated, just like so many Canadians, over doses in the freezers instead of in arms. And then, wow, the doses stopped. And all of a sudden it was Premier saying, hey, wait a minute, where's those doses? We want to put them in arms. Where's the doses, buddy? And it's gone back and forth like that. Now we appear to have a glut in the system because we got a pile of doses arrive. And I'll just give you Ontario example, because those are the numbers I'm closest to. We had about 300,000 to 400,000 doses, and then more than 1 million showed up over the course of 2.5 days. And immediately, Liberal cabinet ministers and MPs start tweeting at the Ford government, Why do you have so many doses in freezers? It's like they waited until they knew the deliveries had arrived. They show up on the publicly available data portal, and immediately they're saying, why are these doses there? And in one case, I think it was 300 and odd thousand in one shipment, more than 500,000 in another, and like right away. As anyone that knows anything about a project like this can tell you, just because 500,000 doses arrive doesn't mean you can get them in arms. The provinces do have to pick up the pace now that the vaccines are showing up. But I'll also tell you this, the provinces and local public health units are afraid of going too fast. And they look at what happened in Saskatchewan. Saskatchewan was going faster than anybody else. In terms of a dose showed up, it went into an arm. And then there was the delay on the Moderna shipment, and they had to cancel 23,000 appointments. That's a lot of people to call up, cancel, and rebook. That's a lot of time and effort wasted. So most provinces have been keeping several days' supply back because the shipments are not always reliable. Sometimes that's been the government's fault. Sometimes it's been the company's fault. But it makes sense to do that. Now we're getting an overabundance. The provinces do have to step up.
Now, Brian, you've watched the online debate and at times the arguments between politicians over whether it's a supply issue or distribution issue that keeps us behind in the vaccines. What did you really discover here?
It's a bit of both, and it depends on the time. I mean, it goes back to what I was just discussing about the 1 million doses show up over the course of a weekend, and immediately the Liberals are saying, why haven't you used them? You guys are hoarding them. Provinces are bad. Well, at times it has been the fault of the federal government. They have promised doses on a certain schedule, and those doses haven't shown up. Most provinces, Alberta included, British Columbia included, have said we want that 2 to 3 day supply at least as a backstop. Because you think about scaling up to be able to vaccinate tens of thousands of people a day, which is what all the major provinces are doing. Manitoba's talking about doing 7,000 a day. Well, in Alberta, you guys did 52,000 the other day. You did more than Ontario. We had a bad day. You guys did more vaccine doses than we did. If all of a sudden you're doing 52,000 doses a day and the supply dries up, you've got all those workers, all that space, all that equipment, and you've just got to shut it down. Okay, well, when do the doses come in? Well, if you don't have extra supply, you could be shut down for 2 or 3 days. It takes time to ramp back up. You don't just go from 0 to 52,000 again. It takes time to ramp back up. You've got to convince those people who you canceled on to reschedule and come back. So at times it is the federal government, at times it is the provinces. They should stop fighting, they should stop bickering, and just do the job of getting the population vaccinated so that we can go to a Jays game or something normal.
Can't we all just get along and, have our big foam fingers? Blue Jays #1, absolutely.
Yeah.
Brian, when you started tracking, Canada ranked, I believe, 12th in the world getting vaccines out. Then we dropped all the way down to 60th. Where are we ranking now?
It depends on how you count, but it's between like 52 and 55 at the moment. This is all from Our World and Data. And they track on a per capita basis how much of a population has been vaccinated. Some people say, oh no, we're well down into the 60s. That's if you don't take out the components that make up the United Kingdom. So they'll count the United Kingdom in that list, but then they'll have England, Scotland, Northern Ireland, and Wales. Well, you can't, that's like counting them twice. So depending on, there's a couple that are in dispute. Are they protectorates or are they on their own? We're between 52 and 55. That's not a good spot for a G7 nation to be in. That's not a good spot for a top 10 economy to be in. And look, I spoke to experts, to go back to this, I hate to keep going back to the baseball game, but I spoke to experts about why is Texas doing so much better than Ontario when they've been open and we haven't. They said a couple things. One, variants of concern. I know that's something Alberta's dealing with. That's something we're dealing with. It's not something Texas is really dealing with, but also their pace of vaccination across the United States, and especially in their urban areas, has been far and above what we've been doing at double our rates or more. And so, all of the reason this matters is while we're behind, we can't get back to that normal life, and we're watching other parts of the world that we normally compare ourselves do that very thing. Get back to living a normal life.
Amen to that. Brian, the United States has long been called the global police force, and now apparently they want to become the global tax force. or the global tax man, there's word that the U.S. is calling for a global minimum corporate tax and at the same time threatening to punish countries that tax tech giants?
Yeah, isn't that bizarre? They want Canada to increase its minimum corporate tax rate. And at the same time, are telling Canada, don't you dare tax Netflix or Facebook or Google. Look, I know people don't like the idea of a tax on Netflix, but Netflix sells things that if they were the company that I work for or the company that you work for, they'd have to pay GST on. They don't have to charge that right now. So, let's put it this way. There is a Canadian streaming service called Crave. Crave has to charge the GST or the HST, depending on what part of the country you live in, and Netflix doesn't. That's a tremendous advantage. So Canada has looked at saying, we're going to charge the same tax. We're going to put everyone on the same level playing field. It's not a horrible idea. I may think taxes are too high, but I think that if you're going to set a tax rate, treat everyone the same. The U.S. is saying if countries do that, we'll punish them. But at the same time, Donald Trump lowered the U.S. corporate tax rate. And the reason he did that was too many companies were keeping money overseas. They were shifting jobs overseas. He lowered it, and immediately thousands of jobs came back and billions of dollars came back. That money, as it was reintroduced into the United States, was taxed at a lower rate than it had been, but the government still got a cut. The Democrats say no, corporations should pay more, but they know that if they increase the taxes, those jobs and that money will just go overseas again. So Janet Yellen, the Treasury Secretary, is saying everyone should charge a minimum of 28%. I'm sorry, Hal, that's a bad idea. Canada's economic advantage going back more than a century under all governments has been have a lower tax rate for corporations than the Americans do. It makes us attractive to invest in. So when you combine our federal 15% with our provincial rates, which vary province to province, we're looking at the low to mid 20s range. So we end up being a little bit below them. Not tremendously, it's not a race to the bottom, but it's a little bit of an edge there. And we offer in a few other things, and companies will say, you know what, I'll invest in Canada. That'll disappear under this. Horrible idea. I hope the Trudeau government says no.
Brian, the former head of the Bank of Canada and Bank of England, will be a featured speaker at a virtual conference as the Liberals are discussing ideas like a universal basic income. Can you explain to our viewers why many people may not be for a universal basic income?
Sure, and it'll be interesting to see how Mark Carney, who's the former Bank of Canada and Bank of England governor, describes issues like that. There's a lot of wonky people, and Mark Carney is nothing if not a wonky person. He looks like someone who come out of an early 1960s sitcom with the clean-cut look. He could have been the neighbor on Bewitched or something. But he and others will be discussing these ideas of a universal basic income, and this is the idea that whether you work or not, you get money from the government. We had a pilot project here in Ontario. I know that Pierre Trudeau did one in Flin Flon, Manitoba, back in the 1970s, but we had a more recent example just a couple of years ago where the Kathleen Wynne Liberal government of Ontario brought one in. And Doug Ford came in and said, I'll scrap that. I'm getting rid of it. It's a bad idea. So the NDP opposition found a couple of people that they said were terribly hard done by this getting rid of this universal basic income. And so I looked into their stories, and one guy was someone who had worked at a bank for years, on management track, making decent money, but quit so that he could design logos for free or in exchange for breathing lessons, yoga classes, acting classes. And he was able to live and pay his rent and enjoy his life because the government gave him money for not working. Another woman had posted online about buying $700 per ticket Elton John seats to go to a concert. So I work hard for my money, and that's not something I'd spend my money on. I'd go to see Elton John in concert, no problem with that. But those are expensive tickets. Why could she afford that? She was on the universal basic income. There are arguments that some economists make, and it's a very theoretical one, that if you get rid of all the other social programs and just have this one, that's a good idea. That's never how it's been introduced in Canada. They always keep all the other social programs and then give you tens of thousands of dollars more. It doesn't work. It discourages work.
Brian, we only have about a minute left here. China is bashing Canada once again. This time it involves a little bit of name calling. But more importantly, do we finally know what happened in the two trials involving Michael Spavor and Michael Kovrig? Are they coming home?
We don't know, and it could pop up at any moment. The Chinese are very secretive about that, but because of our statements on the cases of Michael Kovrig and Michael Spavor, because of our success in rallying international support, they're lashing out. This is a good thing. Iran did this to Canada for years under the Chrétien and the Harper governments. They call you names, they denounce you in state media. My only disappointment with this is I've written some pretty harsh columns of the Chinese government. They have still not called me out, and they're not above calling out individual media outlets when they don't like the coverage. Let them call us names. It means we're getting under their skin.
Political reporter and Toronto Sun columnist Brian Lilley, thanks so much for your time today.
Thank you, Hal.